Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I am honored to be having with me today over the program Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, the political analyst. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We'll be starting the segment straight away with the upcoming report. As I mentioned in the beginning, it will be focusing on the Russia-Africa Summit, or the meeting that took place in St. Petersburg with the participation of His Excellency President Abdel al-Sisi, and more specifically, we will be shedding more light on the trade exchange between Russia and Africa, and more specifically, a third of the Russian trade exchange with Africa is between Russia and Egypt. All this and more in the upcoming report, so stay tuned.
Russian President Vladimir Putin told President Abdel al-Sisi in a meeting in St. Petersburg during the second edition Russia-Africa Summit that Egypt accounts for one-third of Russia's trade exchange with the African continent. President Putin stressed to President al-Sisi that Russia is keen to increase cooperation with Egypt, especially in the promising field of energy, praising the great progress achieved over the past years in relations between the two countries. On his side, President al-Sisi thanked Putin for his warm welcome, stressing Egypt's keenness to cooperate with Russia on both the continental level as well as on the level of bilateral relations. The president also thanked President Putin for establishing the Dama nuclear power plant as well as the Russian industrial zone in Egypt. President al-Sisi co-chaired the first edition of Russia-Africa Summit with Putin in 2019. During the edition, participating countries signed 92 agreements, contracts, and memorandum of understanding worth over $11 billion. In 2022, Egypt's exports to Russia surged $595.1 million, up 21.6% from 2021. Meanwhile, Egypt's imports from Russia increased to $4.1 billion in 2022, up 15.5% from 2021. In the first 6 months of 2023, 750,000 Russian tourists visited Egypt, with estimates that the figure could surpass 1 million by the end of the year.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, as I mentioned in the beginning, that tonight we'll be focusing on the visit of President Abdel al-Sisi to Russia, more specifically to St. Petersburg. How do you see the importance and the significance of the participation of His Excellency President al-Sisi at this summit, the Russia-Africa Summit?
Well, that sort of summit seems to be quite acquiring pride of place among the other summits that were to be held during the course of the last 3 or previous years. Perhaps the second edition, the first that was in 2019 in Sochi, headed by Egypt as well. It was at that time that Egypt was assuming the chairmanship of the African Union, participating in as much as in helping all the problems and pacifying the tussles actually in the African countries, paying special attention to the problems of energy and of finding alternatives for the old traditional gas and oil means of an energy. That was during the first summit in 2019. Perhaps the previous summit, the last, at St. Petersburg actually is commonly regarded also one of, the best achievements that the Egyptian presidency did, occur during the whole year, because it, as I've just mentioned, occupied, a sense of a towering pride place, because of the fact that at this particular stage, the whole world would seem to be quite passing through a large number of struggles and problematic situations, and lack of energy, lack of food, food scarcity, as much as the Russian-Ukrainian war that would seem to be quite leaving its deep impact on not only on the Western world, but almost on all the whole world, including in particular actually the African continent. And perhaps, as its own title might indicate, it would be very much concerned with underlying and solving a large number of problems in Africa, It's a sort of a summit in which a sense of familiarity and deep sense of friendliness and friendship actually on both parties. I mean, that is Vladimir Putin, Mr. Vladimir Putin,
Yes.
the Russian president on the one side, as much as Mr. President Abdel actually on the second. A sort of a summit that was to be praised to a great extent, representing and underlying the sort of, the extraneous as much as the very much sincere, deep concern on the part of the presidential authority of His Own Excellency, actually, Mr. Abdel of getting and delving into actually, the harsh problems of the African continent, the problematic situation of the energy, as much as in the meantime, representing sense of familiarity between both presidents. In the first instance, actually, I would really say that the first edition was very much successful, but the second as well was to a great extent successful. With the existence of about 17 African countries, and despite the fact that the first edition actually was celebrating, about 42 countries actually attended at the then time, with some presidential delegations actually. But in the meantime, this edition is very much, as I've just said, coming at a very particular, exceptional moments in the history of almost the whole world, particularly when, one of the Ukrainian peaceful ships were to be destroyed, actually carrying grains and, a large number of, vessels of food that would seem to be quite a great extent in a position to help the whole world. But despite that sort of devastation of the vessel, of the peaceful vessel, and the withdrawal of Vladimir Putin, actually, of the grain agreement, actually, the fact remains that Mr. President Abdel is very much demanding 5 demands, actually, from Vladimir Putin, actually, perhaps the first of which is very much directed to the return again and the endorsement for a second time, actually, of the grain, endorsement or the grain agreement, actually, for a second time, attempting to underline again how dire the situation would seem to be actually for almost all the African countries, particularly when Vladimir Putin would withdraw from that agreement on the account of the devastation of one of the vessels that was carrying the food and the grain, a sort of a thing that will necessitate the fact that he will ask every now and again to raise and lift the sanctions on the part of the American administration from his own country, a suitable situation for the man actually to try to participate and to get into the heart of Africa through his own negotiations and peaceful initiations through that sort of summit. And despite the American administration was very much frowning on and upon that sort of summit, actually representing that it was a dire failure or an absolute sense of fiasco. But to my own point of view, it would seem to be far from being so, because it did tackle one of the most substantial elements that did worry almost the whole world to a greater extent, which is the food scarcity and the grain shortage on a large scale, a sort of a thing in which Mr. President Abdel was participating and harping on and on in his own initiation with, Mr. Vladimir Putin. That was his own first initiation, a sort of a thing that had been endorsed by the Minister of Supply, representing how it would be very much substantial and very much helpful for waiving and alleviating the sort of the costs on the part of the economic Egyptian budget, actually, by replacing the dollars, of which we are passing through a very much, sharp black at the moment, and in the meantime substituting it with the Egyptian pound or the Russian, currency. One suitable situation that His Own Excellency would utilize almost every suitable chance at his own disposal to try to solve the whole situation without maximizing the sort of the budget or, loading a great deal of heavy load on our own economic as much as the political situation at the present time. But this is in the first instance. The second, demand is perhaps, the expansion and the widespread extension of the Daba nuclear plant. the sort of, the very much strategic step and logistic initiation on the part of the Russian administration towards the southwest of Egypt, initiating a very good plan in the future, actually, to change the traditional ways of energy by something clean, by something clear, a sort of initiation that Egypt, as a presidential authority, was taking the lead during the course of the last December, actually, when it would initiate the COP27, actually, calling for the green energy and substituting the traditional fuel and saving, the fuel and the gas that would, prompt the sense of power to make a great deal of energy. In a way, that would help the Egyptian Presidential Authority actually to export electricity to a great extent. In addition to this fact, I think one fundamental issue in here, which would represent the deep concern of the Egyptian presidency, actually, of saving the present time situation of the lack of energy, is the initiation of a technical school for nuclear power, actually, for reproducing at the then time, after 5 years, postgraduate students. That would be very much helpful in working with all the ways and means in nuclear plants, and in the meantime of substituting the Russian experts at the present time situation with 100 Egyptian professional experts, I would say, after their own years of graduation. Perhaps the third dimension that would seem to be quite very much important in the part of His Own Excellency is the initiation on his own part, actually, with his own deep, sincere talk with Vladimir Putin of maximizing the number of the Russian tourists, actually. I think that Dr. Nazih, the ambassador, the Egyptian ambassador, Nazih Nagar, actually the president or the ambassador of the Egyptian ambassador to Russia, did declare at one time that the number of the Russian tourists that would come on a weekly basis actually to Egypt and the Egyptian coasts and beaches actually would reach to the amount of about 30,000 tourists, with the hope that in the near future actually it would reach to 500,000 per a week. A sort of thing that will be very much helping actually the economic instability at the present time situation, and we could really get benefit of our own, natural resource and these, assets that would be very much helpful in saving the economic instability at the present time situation. Perhaps the fourth point that would seem to be of a great importance, the fact that the logistic territorial land of the Suez Canal, actually the industrial zone, which is very much important in the present time situation, it would reflect to a greater extent the deep concern and interest actually on the Russian administration of how they would find in Egypt very much suitable territorial land through the aid of which they could really build companies and factories in a way that would help them to represent their own merchandise items in a very safe place, very much safeguarded, very much peaceful place, away from the sanctions and imposing the sanctions on the part of the American administration on them, a sort of a step that had been inaugurated before by China, actually finding also in Egypt, particularly in the industrial area adjacent to the Suez Canal, a very much safe place also to be away from the American sanctions. All this would give us a clear testimony to the fact that not only China as much as Russia, but also American, because there is the first initiation actually through the aid of which they can really find that China, Russia, America would hold, more often than not, a large number of conferences, the American African conference, the Russian African conference, the Chinese.
Every party is
African,
trying to be getting the benefit from Africa. Dr. Mohamed, Abdel, Halim, yes, the political analyst. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
Thank you very much indeed.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. I will be leaving you, however, with the presidential activities of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi over the past week in the upcoming report. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
President Abdel al-Sisi arrives in St. Petersburg to participate in the second Russia-Africa summit. President Abdel al-Sisi meets with his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, at Constantine Palace in St. Petersburg. President Abdel al-Sisi participates in opening session of Russia-Africa Economic and Humanitarian Forum, which is held on the sidelines of the second Russia-Africa summit. President Abdel al-Sisi participates in a meeting of African leaders on the African Mediation Initiative to settle the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, held in St. Petersburg. President Abdel al-Sisi meets with the President of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, on the sidelines of the second Russia-Africa summit held in St. Petersburg. President Abdel al-Sisi attends a lunch banquet with President Putin along with African heads of state and government heading the various African economic groupings. President Abdel al-Sisi gives a speech at the plenary session of the second Russia-Africa summit. President al-Sisi participates in a commemorative photo of the leaders participating in the second African-Russian summit held in St. Petersburg, Russia.